Welcome, good people. This is Jay Artis-Wright, CEO of Freedom to Choose Schools, and you are joining us again for another episode of Choice Words. Today's episode is about the intersections of state policy and education and the impacts that it has on our communities. I found this episode to be most relevant based off of some recent things that we've heard happen in national news. And we're going to dive into that and ask our guests to kind of explain some of that and give us the details of those intersections and how specifically when we look at education as lawmakers, parents, and students, we should be making sure that we understand those connections. So without further ado, let me introduce our guest. Ms. Paula White is from New Jersey. She is the current executive director of 50CAN Jersey. And Ms. Staci Childs is not only an attorney and an artist, but she's also a school board member here in Houston. And I just want to give you guys the floor to give a better introduction than I possibly could. Just let people know a little bit about yourselves. And Ms. Paula White, I will start with you.
Sure. So I'm Paula, and have known this powerhouse, Jay Artis-Wright, for a long time. Love this work that you're doing. And so I'm a traditionally trained teacher. I was a child development major in undergrad at Spelman College and taught for the better part of a decade, and have done various things since then, including founding a public charter school, leading school improvement for the state of New Jersey, and right now and most recently, really digging into the policy and advocacy space, pushing on policy, pushing on advocacy, building advocates, just for one big idea, getting every kid a good education. Is that so wrong?
No, it's not wrong at all. And it shouldn't be so hard either, right? Thank you so much, Ms. Paula. And I'm going to ask you some more because I love talking to you. I've known this woman, for like 15 years now? It's been a minute. Former Jersey girl myself, now living in Houston. So this connection is so sweet because I'm in Houston now. And Miss Staci Childs, you're my new friend. You're my new friend.
Hey, new friend.
I know, right? Just real quick before you go, like when I tell you this woman is so bomb, I met her. We were on a panel together in February. And I almost lost my thought because I was just looking at her and listening to all the things she was saying. And I was just like so captivated by the power of her words. So Staci, I'm so glad that you took the time to join us and tell the rest of the folks listening and viewing a little bit about yourself.
So I am a original ATLian, like the Outkast album. I'm from Atlanta. I've been living in Houston for about 12 years. I started my journey in Houston as a Teach for America Corps member. So I consider myself an ed reformer for a long time. And I enjoyed that work. And I've been really just trying to climb up the ladder to figure out how I can do more for more students. So I have been a public defender, criminal defense attorney for the past 6 years. And it has been eye-opening. And it made me want to go back to the drawing board to figure out how we can make education better. 2021, I started my campaign for State Board of Education. I won in a runoff, and I am now serving in my second term. And the most important work I think I've been able to contribute on the State Board of Education is uplifting leaders who feel like they have innovative ideas and creative ways to bring education to students in a new way. Students that are typically left behind, looked over. You see them on the statistics. You see them at the bottom of the charts, but no one has an idea on how to move them from the bottom to the top, or at least equal to their counterparts. So I've enjoyed helping at least 10 school leaders open up their schools in the past 3 years in District 4, which is Houston. So that's what I've been up to.
That is awesome. And that's not a light feat in Houston at all, especially with the current culture and dynamics that we are in this state. So don't just dismiss it. That's what I've been doing because that's a lot of work. I mean, you look well rested considering what you've been up to. So
Yeah, I guess I'll just say like a quick point about that. I did not realize how politicized the charter school dynamic was until I got in this role. And part of my work has been to try to demystify the whole notion of school choice and charter schools because the research shows that parents want it, students like it, students thrive, parents feel more included, when they have the opportunity to choose their child's school. But the politics have been hard to navigate. You're right. So I've been trying to demystify some of the stuff over the past few years.
And teachers like it too. It gives teachers a runway to be more innovative and have some autonomy as well. And which is a great segue to you, Miss Paula, because I know when we met, you actually were a school leader of a charter school in New Jersey. Tell us a little bit about what your experience has been, and to Stacy's point, why is that dynamic so difficult when people look at charter schools? Expanding quality options has been a huge passion and a driver for you. Where does that come from?
Yeah. So, I would say everything always starts when you're small, right? I told you that I'm a traditionally trained teacher. You know that poster that says everything I needed to know I learned in kindergarten. So, when I was 4 years old, I learned how to read, and I learned how to say the word psychology because I learned how to read very well, and then I found out the definition was psychology was is the study of the mind. And I would just walk up to random people and say, psychology is the study of the mind. And people would be like, look at her, she's so smart. And so I understood very, very early on about the power of knowledge and how it impacted how you interact with the world and how the world interacts with you. And then fast forward, I actually had a cousin of mine. This was the most pivotal experience around education for me. A cousin of mine, his mom, my uncle used to travel for work, and he used to live, obviously, with his mom when my uncle was away. And through a series of events, my uncle found out that he had been kept home from school. This was a long time ago. We didn't realize that my aunt actually had a burgeoning mental illness. It was paranoia. And so she thought the school was trying to hurt him. She kept him home from school. And so my uncle reached out to my parents and said, we need to have him come and live with you. My cousin came to live with us, and I taught him how to read based on what I was learning in school. And it was the most empowering thing I've ever done. And it helped me to realize how that could be life changing for him. And I'm a very impatient person. I mean, I think I'm a work in progress. I think my husband would say that. But what I would say is that that's the reason I founded a charter.
That is amazing. And what an incredible story to be able to teach someone else how to read, another family member, which that happens often in our lives and our families that we don't share enough. I want to pivot a little bit because, like I said, one of the reasons why this episode was so important was because of recent actions that we saw in national news coming actually, ironically, out of Texas. And I felt like when I was watching that, because I understand policy, because I've also been in education, I was like, there's so many implications about what's happening that are going to trickle down to our schools and to our towns that people need to dive deeper into this. And this that I'm speaking of is the Democrats leaving the state to break quorum. Can you explain what happened recently in Texas with this quorum, and then how does that example link between the political powers and the struggles in education policy?
Oh man, I tried to figure out if I understand it to the point where I can teach a sixth grader, right? So,
Right.
in my mind, every state is supposed to have equal representation in Washington. So, if you live in a small city, a small rural area, or if you live in a big city where the population is greater, but you're in a compacted geographical area, because of the Voting Rights Act, there are supposed to be maps drawn that equally reflect all the people that live in the state. This is based on, or at least it's supposed to be based on, census data. So, we take the census every 10 years. The last time we took the census was 2020. So, in 2021, supposedly, Texas took the census data to redraw maps that fairly aligned and would allow for equal representation across race and geographical area in the state. Well, we have a new president that was elected in November. And although he has a lot of strong Republican influence, he wants more. And he thought of a great way to get more by creating more Republican leaning congressional seats so that when he's trying to get things passed in Congress, he won't have as much backlash. It won't be as hard. So he called Governor Greg Abbott and he said, hey, I need 5 seats. Let's do it. We need more. And like I told you, this is supposed to be based on data. on census data that's taken every 10 years. It's not supposed to happen mid-decade. But Greg Abbott said, hey, we're going to make it happen. So he called a special session. A lot of the state reps and state senators thought it was going to be about flooding, maybe about protecting the constituents of Texas, but instead it's about redistricting or redrawing these maps, which is not supposed to happen mid-decade. So although there is a Republican leaning House and Senate, you have to have a certain amount of people present to take a vote on anything. That's called a quorum, right? And although Republicans outnumber Democrats, Democrats realize, hey, if we leave, if we get gone, they won't even be able to take the vote because they won't be able to make quorum. So these Democrats fled. They went to places like Massachusetts, New York, Chicago, and it's been refreshing as a Democrat to see finally there is something that we can do, and we're using our agency. We're not trying to complain. We're trying to show that we have skin in the game too. But it's been unfortunate because our governor has said, even though you guys have stalled this time, I'm going to keep bringing redistricting and redrawing the lines to a special session every month until we get it done. And I believe him because he did something similar with
The ESAs.
right. So this is unfortunate because a lot of these people have to work. They're not state reps or state senators full time, so they can't use their campaign funds to pay the fines they've accrued by taking this stand. And what's really important here is a lot of the constituents don't understand what's happening because this is so in the weeds, right? This is so weedy, and it's like, well, how does that impact me? Well, uh, when this happens, it's really not an if, in my opinion. When this happens, the representation that you did have is going to be even smaller, and it almost feels like it'll be like, well, there's your black congresswoman or congressman. There, that's what you wanted. That's what you get. There's your people. Don't complain. But will we actually have as strong or as big or as fierce of a vote when it comes to making decisions in Congress? Like, for example, what will happen with the U.S. Department of Education? Will Texas take up some of the work that the U.S. Department of Education was doing, right? What will happen with Texas Education Agency? These are some things that are going to impact students, impact parents, impact students with special needs. And it feels sometimes like we're helpless, but we're not. And I think the first step to realize that you're not helpless is to understand what's happening in front of you.
You broke that down 6th grade to 12th grade. Like, and I that's why I wanted to bring you here, because I knew between you and Paula, y'all could break it down for people to understand. So I appreciate that. And Paula, I want you to pick up that baton and give us an example of like how this impacts us from an education standpoint, if you could. Like, and I know, like, I think that you're a policy wonk too. I know that you're a policy wonk too. But just in the sense of like, okay, so now we see this happening. We also see the federal government shifting the powers to go to state specifically. I'm not even going to get into the over 30 something governors' seats that are going to be up next year. But all of this are political moves that are going to lead to policy decisions that are going to trickle down to our districts and our families by way of votes. Can you, in the same kind of fashion, just break down like why should we be paying attention to this from like a policymaker standpoint? And one thing I do appreciate is that the need for hope, right? Because if you are a Democrat, like you said, Staci, people are like, okay, we see something happening. Even if it's just resistance, it's like it's refreshing to see there's something that can be done. Paula, in your opinion, what else can be done, and what does this mean for us right now as far as what we're seeing happening in this shift to power on the state side? Can you explain that a little bit for us?
Yeah. So first of all, let me say New Jersey is one of only 2 states that actually we have a gubernatorial race this year. So us and the state of Virginia. So our primaries just ended, and we are going into a general gubernatorial election in the fall. And so one of the things that as advocates and policy folks, that we should always be doing is to engage on both sides of the aisle, regardless of where we are along that, the political continuum of, the election cycle and so on. And so we have been doing that, with educators, with parents, where, we're getting in, we're speaking. First of all, when we had a full field, during the primary, and then obviously when you get whittled down to one, then you have sort of more pointed conversations. We can't be waiting until the temperature is rising and we're in the bathtub. Like, we have to know how this works. We have to know that the temperature will rise, and we have to make demands. And unfortunately, and I say this, it's fortunately and unfortunately, we have to focus on the locus of our control. So one of the ironic things about what's happening right now from the federal government is like, oh, well, we're going to push more funds down to the states, and we're focusing on states' rights or state control and so on, state autonomy. And so while that can have some troubling implications, and we're like, whoa, 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 what about these cases that are right now, in the Department of Education? What about this? What about that? But what it also says is that what happens at the state level now rises in importance, because if we have more money in our back pocket and more leeway to make decisions about that money at the state level, then who is your governor is going to make a big difference, because they're the ones that are going to decide what they do with that money, right? And so, in a state like Georgia, for example, where you see like micro schools popping up, that's not a thing in New Jersey. Where you see various iterations of school choice showing up, that's very much dependent on the governor and what they feel that the state has an appetite for. So I think that we need to be engaging day one at all times across the aisle, and we need folks to know that there is heft in, like, our movement. Like, we have people behind us. We have these parents, they're not asleep at the wheel. And we also have to ensure a seamless transition, regardless of, let's say, who becomes the governor. So even in Texas, even if ultimately what is what the GOP is looking to happen, if that happens, at least by this conversation being elevated on a national level because of the actions of these lawmakers leaving the state, then folks in other states can say, okay, well, what implications does this have for our state? Where are we? What power do we have right now? What can we do? So you kind of put in a clarion call out, to, like, let's see what's going on, and let's see how that lesson can tell us what we need to be doing in our state, on our sort of local level.
Yeah, it's almost like there's got to be some type of strategic political audit, right? To find out, like, okay, what is possible. And I feel like what we saw happen with this delay in the quorum is kind of a tipping point for that. I know that there's been news about potentially the governor in California trying to find some way to strategically make some political moves as well. And you bring up another good point, and that is to the degree of like the process that these things go through. Staci, you are also a school board member. And I want to ask you, because I think there are often misconceptions about what actually you do have the power to control and do not have the power to control. Can you share with us, like, what are some of those misconceptions? And if you had a chance to provide that clarity, here it is.
Okay, all right. I'm gonna try not to be long-winded. So as a state board of education member, here are the things I can do. I can help approve or veto the charter schools that come every generation. So now we're entering generation 31. Typically, there are about 17 to 18 charters that will send in their application. We whittle that down to about 8 schools that make it to capacity interviews. And those are interviews between the Texas Education Agency and members of the state board. And then from there, the Commissioner of Education will review those interviews, look at the notes taken, and he will choose typically about 4 to 5 that he will offer a charter to. And then we have the ability to take no action, which means we agree with the commissioner or veto his recommendation. So that's one thing. Secondly, we approve instructional materials. So we help shape state standards or objectives. And then based on those standards, we are talking with vendors and we're talking with curriculum writers, and we're using this process that we created called the HQIM, or High Quality Instructional Materials Process, to vet which materials will be on our high quality list. And it is our goal that while we don't have the leeway to tell local districts what to choose, we hope that they will choose state approved materials. We also control a $57 billion permanent school fund, which is the third largest endowment fund, I think, in North America. And we take that very serious because we offer bonds at low cost for districts, and we want to make sure that we are continuing to grow this investment for our children's children, right? And finally, for special district schools like military districts and things like that, we're able to approve school board members at those special school districts. People always come up to me and they say, "Hey, why can't the teachers get a raise? We should be making $75,000 or $100,000 a year." I agree, but we are not members of the state legislature, so we don't control that money, right? People often ask me, "Why can't we get rid of the STAR test, which is the state standardized test?" I would agree that there are parts of the STAR that should be done away with, but we are not the state legislature. They are the people that make the laws that we have to abide by, right? So those are some of the things that we do. But one thing I just have to lift up before I end is that I learned this year that as an SBOE member, while I'm not a state legislature, I can put on my lobbying hat, if you will, and say, "Hey, this is what I've been seeing. This is what I think is necessary. Can you put forth this legislation? Because this is what I think will happen." So the Commissioner of Education, he shows us, as I said earlier, these statistics of students that are not performing on grade level. They're doing poorly year after year after year, namely Black and Brown students, a lot of times transient students, sometimes students in rural areas. And I'm like, okay, so what are we going to do to improve the outcomes for those students? And I would always get silence. Or I would always get, "We're trying." I would always get, "Well, the achievement gap is an age old question that we're still trying to answer." And I'm like, okay, look, don't pacify me. These students are matriculating through school right now. They only get one shot, sometimes two, to be in these grades. So we thought of creating a targeted intervention program to slow down the process of learning math and learning reading, such that if you do have gaps, they won't continue to persist as you get older, and you will have a better shot at education. And I went to at least 100 legislators to try to put forth what's called a legislative rider, or a money allocation towards this intervention program. And I had to work across the aisle. As you know, there are more conservatives here in Texas than Democrats. I had to change my pitch a lot of the times, depending on whose room I was in, but we were able to get it done. And this is the first time a state board of education member has ever got millions of dollars for an intervention program, right? So although that's not necessarily written in what I do as an SBOE member, I realize that, okay, you have this elected role. What are the things that you can do around, like, your enumerated responsibilities that you can do to help bring outcomes for students?
I would just love to jump in from just hearing what Staci said, because I know this is a national podcast. And I think one of the things is to really understand what's going on in your state. Staci was elected, right, in a runoff. In the state of New Jersey, our state board of education members are appointed by the governor. So again, what is the leverage point, right? This is why you engage with your governor, your gubernatorial candidates, because there is no election for state board of education. The other thing she mentioned was the HQIM, the high quality instructional materials, and them creating a list in the state of Texas. One of the things I've been trying to get New Jersey to do is to do just that. They don't want to do that. They will say, okay, here is a rubric for what constitutes high quality instructional materials, which of course is very appropriate. And it's wonderful that they do that. But if we can go another step and say, oh, and by the way, here are some examples of curricula that fit that bill. Because we have 590 school districts in the state of New Jersey. We have school districts that have no schools. That's for another podcast. I know that sounded crazy, but I'm just telling you right now, that's how it is. And so if you have 590 school districts, you want to have certain parameters that the State Department, who have expertise, if you say you have expertise, which you do, then it's incumbent to leverage that expertise. So that's something that Texas is doing right now that we are not doing.
Man, when I tell y'all, I told y'all about two powerhouses on here. Y'all weren't listening to me. I mean, I could just sit. I mean, you guys are amazing, and I love it because you really break it down in layman's terms. And Paula, you were talking a lot about the connections, right? Like the connections to the governor's influence on school boards is a direct connection because he appoints them in New Jersey, and the difference of that in Texas because they're elected. This is all great information to know because there are differences in our states. And this is exactly why we have this national podcast so people could pay attention to what's happening. I wanted to follow up on that question because I know that both of you are very savvy on policy and getting it through, specifically across lines of differences, without naming what we know to be true for the most marginalized, the most impacted, which is our Black and Brown students, right? And in a state like Texas and New Jersey, you can't just come out and say we need to help Black students, right? Because they're gonna be like, oh, well, it doesn't really work like that. So, two questions. One, the question for you, Paula, is based off of what you were just explaining. The legislative, the legal battles on policy. How does that impact educational equity in Jersey, and what are some of the things that you've done to get around that?
Yeah, so I'll be honest, I'm not very interested in the achievement gap conversation because one of the things that it does is, first of all, it actually, that is a DEI conversation in and of itself, because what you're saying is that this is typically the white population will say this is where they are, and so the Black and Hispanic students need to get to that point. Did nobody tell you where the white students are? So what if we have the white students that there are, reading 45% of them are reading at grade level. Oh, we have to close the achievement gap. Okay, so what are we saying? We want 45% of Black kids to read at grade level? Well, no, that's not good enough. It's not good enough for white kids either if that's 45%. But I'm saying that I think, for me, I frame the conversation within what is an acceptable benchmark for children to be able to read, right? Or write
Period.
or
Right.
compute or be ready to have career ready, cost effective options when they leave high school, right? And so period. So let's start there, and then the numbers, the data speaks for itself, right? For them, that's what Jay-Z said: men lie, women lie, numbers don't. So you look at the data and you say these students are here. So therefore, if these students are way down here relative to what the benchmark is, we need to do XYZ. If we got to do more, we have to do more. We're not doing more because they're Black. We're doing more because they are not at that level. And so we have to work to get them there. That is our job. And so, obviously we know that there's systemic issues. There's no question about that. But anything that we're doing is framed within that framework. How do we get a teaching force that's more representative of the communities, of what the students look like in the classroom? How do we get that? We get that by focusing on excellence and by getting rid of barriers, systemic barriers, like not paying internships and teacher residencies that a lot of Black and Brown teacher candidates, they're like, well, I'm out because I got to make money. I can't student teach all day. So how do we then advocate for legislation that says let teachers get stipends, let teachers get a residency, just like med students do? They don't get what they make as doctors, but they're going to get something, right? And so those are the kinds of policies that we work on. And it is based on looking at the data, no different than we look at the jobs numbers or whatever it is, whatever data it is, that's what we're looking at. The data as, measured to a benchmark.
Right. And I love that. Numbers don't lie, which is true. And we need to put that on our next round of t-shirts. Because to your point, that then eliminates the whole argument around race, right? Because it's, again, then it goes directly to what the issue is, which I love that because we often have to defend why our organization is so profound and bold about the need for representation in the classroom to look like the students that it serves. And it's based off of numbers as well, because we constantly show that when a student has a representative voice, a leadership that looks like them, they excel, better. That it's data, it's stats that show that. And so therefore, when we're looking at a population that is having challenges in that regard, that's an opportunity to help them and support them academically. So I love that you broke that down in that way. And I think we're going to have to continue to say that numbers don't lie. Staci, I want to ask you about the work that you did with the HQIM, and then also you talked about working across lines of differences. So what does bipartisan support for school choice look like in practice? Like, talk to us about that.
Oh, um, so many things. I want to say, Paula, you're spot on. And I feel like that's the only reason why we got the legislation passed that, well, the writer that we got passed this legislative session is because we talked about the numbers. Because when you go to these state reps and these state senators and you say, hey, we need to help the lowest performing campuses, only 20% of the students pass STAR, we don't even bring up race, they tend to listen. So I agree with you. Bipartisan support for school choice has been incredibly interesting in Texas. I feel like in Texas, school choice has just been an issue that's normally been looked at as conservative. It's normally been looked at as these are options only for a few, only available to a few. So if you believe in school choice, you only believe in helping the few. And I just vehemently have disagreed with that for years, and I still do. And I think when we see schools popping up in places like Houston, places where they've historically struggled, and you see bright spots, I raise those stories up, and I think that started to help. But it's an uphill battle in Texas. I'd say for me being on the state board, there are 15 members, 10 conservatives, 5 Democrats. I am the only Democrat that's pro charter, right? So I walk a very lonely road on the SBOE, being as pro school choice as I am, because, like Paula said, this is like mini reparations. This is an opportunity for people who probably understand the most nuanced situation for these students and their families and their parents to get at the root of the issue. But it is not seen like that statewide. So a lot of my work is when it comes to school choice is actually not working across the aisle. That's actually what's helpful. That's actually what's heartwarming is working across the aisle with school choice because the people across the aisle typically agree. It's really working along the same lines in Texas where it's like, hey, I understand that this is politicized. I understand who you have backing you. I understand when you get back home, you have certain packs, etc., that may side eye you. But what is good for kids? And I feel like I asked that question on the dais so much that I've begun to sway some of my Democratic colleagues on the school choice front.
Yeah, it's important. It's important because again, it's almost like you got to get back to the reality of what it is that you're here for and what you're fighting for. And at the same time, I do give grace to specifically elected leaders in states like Texas, in states like New Jersey, who really sometimes have to deal with what they call political suicide when they do stick their necks out on. And it seems to often be on education. Education seems to be that issue that if you don't follow the caucus line, they will try to put you out. And it is unfortunate because the people who suffer are there most of the time it's their constituents because they're trying to basically keep themselves in office. And like I said, I can respect that because we do need you in office, obviously. But we do have to come to some middle ground as far as like, how do we protect you? How do we support you? But also, how do we make sure that you're doing right by your constituents and that your position is not just self serving, but actually public serving, right? Paula, did you want to add on to that?
Yeah, I mean, I just moment of silence for Obama. That's what I want to say. Shout out to Obama. You know, the last standing Democrat who stood on business for public school choice for everybody, because choice is built into the water of people in the middle and upper classes. And that's the problem with the school choice conversation, is that we say it's school choice when we're talking about, predominantly black and brown kids who are in the lower socioeconomic echelons, not suggesting that that is a thing by virtue of being black, obviously, not to be misconstrued. But what I'm saying is that when you have financial options, you have options, period. And you don't even think about the fact that you have choice, because you're like, well, I want to buy a new house. I'm going to choose this neighborhood versus this neighborhood because this. But when you don't have that same financial resource, you are just like, okay, I'm going to put it in Zillow. Okay, it has to stop at this amount of money because that's what I have, 200, whatever it is, right? And then those neighborhoods are chosen for me. And then now I am now beholden to, my zip code is going to determine my students' options. So I think the most important thing is to recognize that choice is baked into middle and upper class. It's in the water, so we don't even talk about it. My middle son was just visiting me. My son Kyrie was just visiting me, and I was talking about when he learned to read, and he said, "Ma, I don't remember learning how to read." And you know what? The research shows that children who are excellent readers, they don't remember learning how to read. It's like they just feel like they've been reading all their lives. But when you have a problem with reading, you remember that because you remember the humiliation when somebody said, okay, Paula, it's your turn. You remember feeling hot around your neck. You remember all of those things. And so that's the delineation with school choice is that people with money, they don't think they choosing. They don't even realize they're making choices. But when you don't have it, then that's when it becomes belabored. And now everybody's looking at you. Well, I don't know if you should, and perhaps you should not. And I don't think that. No, they should have choices just like other people of other socioeconomic background has choices because at the end of the day, parents have one job. They have one job, and that's to optimize the life chances of their child. And so we cannot afford to be political around that. Everything ain't for everybody. You can have a child in a traditional public school, a child in a public charter school. It just depends on that child and what those offerings are and what the fit is. But that job of the parent doesn't change. They have a job to optimize the life chances of their child. And education is the number one way to do that in our society, outside of the moral, teachings and all sorts of things.
No, you're absolutely right. And I will add on to that. And every parent, regardless of socioeconomic background, demographic, or race, that's exactly what they want to do. They want to extend the opportunities and make sure that their children have better opportunities than the ones that we had as well. And so there in itself should also be a moral ground that we all find commonality in to move this margin forward.
Yeah, I want to say one quick thing about that though. I think from a parent's perspective, and I'm not a parent yet, it seems easy. Like I want to make the best choice for my students if I can. But from an elected leader's perspective, I often get people saying, when you opt to be school choice, you're leaving thousands of students behind that won't get in those schools, right? So how could you be school choice knowing you represent hundreds of thousands of students who won't get in those schools? What about them?
Wake up Harriet Tubman and ask her that.
Right.
Harriet,
Right.
and ask Harriet that. Ask Harriet why. How dare you take 50 people to freedom, knowing that you can't take 5,000?
Correct. Yeah.
Obviously, she wanted to take the 5,000,
Yeah.
but she could take the 50, and that's what she did.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, there you go. Stacy, put that in on the dice the next time somebody asks you that question, right? It's real though. It's real. The final question I want y'all to answer for our listeners is, what should parents and advocates across this country be watching for next?
Ooh. I would say, first of all, and I just need to say this, and I don't mean to trivialize anybody's political prowess. Please make sure you're registered to vote. In Texas, being registered to vote right now is key because we have, well, at least I live in Congressional District 18. So we have a special election coming up in November. And then we have more elections coming right up after that in March and then in November. So this next year is pivotal for the people in Houston and for the people in Texas. So make sure you register to vote and you're paying attention to who's running for office and what they're saying. And finally, we need to figure out if they get rid of our standardized test, which is the STAR, over these next special sessions. How are we going to monitor students? What's going to be required of your students to make sure that they're meeting the mark? So.
Thank you so much. And I will add one point to that because oftentimes in my family, they'll be like, well, voting doesn't matter. I almost feel like registering to vote matters sometimes more than voting because, or they go hand in hand because people look at those numbers to see where people are registered to vote in things like redistricting. And so even the power of registering is important. And a lot of times people don't, they don't equate why the registering to vote and voting they go hand in hand obviously, but more so like the power and the importance of the registering to vote, right? Because people only think about it every 4 years when we're thinking about a presidency, but no, it's like all the time. Everything happens through those numbers. So thank you for adding that. Ms. Paula, question to you. What should parents and advocates across the country be thinking about next?
Yep. So I think two things. Malana Karenga, founder of Kwanzaa, I saw him once, and somebody got up in the crowd and said, I think that people, we need to get organized. The problem is we need to get organized. And Karenga said to him, "Do you belong to an organization?" And that was a mic drop. And so I would say to parents, we do need to get organized. The question is, do you belong to an organization? So if there's an organization in your community, whether it's the PTA, the PTO, or some other organization that is coalesced around anything having to do with education or the things that matter for your family, join that organization, number one. And number two, get on Chat GPT and put in your address and ask them, if you don't already know, who is my state assembly, who are my state assembly persons, who is my state senator, who is my congressperson, for our country. And so, in other words, that we need, our next step is to make sure that we know who our legislators are so that we can engage directly with them. Because once we know who they are, we can go down to their office and we can say, here's this thing that I'm concerned about. Whether that's getting a stoplight at your corner because kids are running across the street, or indeed, something having to do more specifically with a school.
Yep, that's fantastic. Thank you guys both. I have one final question. Every episode, we try to ask our guests to chime in on what choice words means to you. What would be your choice words for folks to know, whether it be lawmakers, parents, students, your neighbor? What are some choice words that you would like for people to remember from your time with us on this recording?
Well, I'm not going to say who I have choice words for. First of all, we got a little bit of a list, and then I still got to go out in public. But I would say, I'm a person of faith, and this idea, I'll flip this idea of sort of love thy neighbor as thyself. I'll flip that idea to, if it's good enough for you, it's good enough for me. That's the choice words that I have. That I would take into any conversation when advocating for things for communities that may not have what everybody else has. If it's good enough for you, it's good enough for me.
I love that. That actually gave me chills. That's awesome. Thank you so much, Paula. Miss Staci?
Yeah, I'd say for me, I have some choice words for my constituents and for the leader of my state. For the constituents, I would say, don't give up your power, right? I know based on everything we've been seeing in the news, it seems crazy and confusing, but I would just encourage them not to give, not just the constituents, everybody, don't give up your power. You don't realize like how much good work we can do when you don't give up your power. But for the leader of my state, I would say, dear sir, it's only a matter of time. It's only a matter of time. When we really I really truly believe that not only do my people in this state want school choice, I feel like we are blue deep down in our hearts. We just need to get registered to vote and vote. And when we do, which we will, it's only a matter of time.
Love that. I love both of those, and I wholeheartedly agree. So both of y'all, I'm so grateful for you taking the time to spend with us today. I think this is going to be one of the most fruitful conversations we've probably had, because you guys are just able to literally educate us on what's happening in our communities. And I just applaud you and thank you so much. For us who's listening, this is another episode of Choice Words. You can find out more if you go to chooseschools.org, which is Freedom to Choose Schools' new website. I am your host, Jay Artis-Wright, and stay tuned for more. Thank you so much.